The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator, which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features draft a team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I am joined today by fellow members of Bills Mafia, Dean, Randall. How are you guys doing?
Not bad. Not bad.
Cool.
This is my second one today. We did this with Robin and T earlier at 11 o'clock. So if I start to babble, just shut me up.
Cool. Randall, it's good to see you. I think this is the second time this week.
Yeah, second time this week, so it's not overdoing it at all. But first one in a long time that I've done with Dean, so I'm excited to hang out with some Dean.
Yeah, so we're putting this together. So we did one podcast earlier this week on the Bills off season. That was with Randall and Alex, and we kind of focused more on the roster. This episode is going to focus more on the draft. And Dean, do you want to tell everybody kind of like what a scout score is and maybe a little bit about like how you go about tracking what you track?
I certainly can. This is my hobby, and what it involves is following the accounts of about 2,000 college media types that give out the information who has credentialed scouts at their games. I have done this now for several years, so we're actually collecting the information over time. It's pretty interesting. It helps me to understand, for instance, if you get 1 point for one game, one scout. We had multiple games this year where 2 scouts attended, and in the case of Syracuse, 3 scouts at one game. It's just down the thruway, so maybe that doesn't count. The other thing that's really interesting is if a player has a good game, you're apt to see a scout at the next game from the Bills. If they get Brandon Bean at their game, and we've had a few this year, not as many as last year, they get 5 points, 3 points for attending the Shrine, 4 points for the Senior Bowl. That's kind of how it's going to work. If we get a 30 visit, they're going to get 6 points, and that type of thing. If they have a combine conversation, it'll be 3 more points, and so forth. I'd love to try to predict which 30 visitors are coming before they actually announce them. That'd be fun.
So, Dean, do you have information on who Buffalo met with at the Senior Bowl?
We have very few that they actually met with at the Senior Bowl, and I have a feeling that they probably were there, but they weren't announcing as much as in the past.
Right. So I definitely saw a Bills scout there. Like, it was very clear that was a Bills logo. I think I even posted a photo of it to X.
Cool.
But where I was asking is specifically, do we have a log of who was interviewed? And there's one player when we get to the edges that I want to talk about is do we interview him?
Right.
But I'm going to let you continue. Go ahead.
But very few are announced like they normally do, saying that, so and so met with such and such. Anyway, so what I did is I collected all of the schools that had a scout score of more than 5. So 6 or more got you into this. And there are 28 wide receivers that actually had a scout score of more than 5, 27 edges, and so on. I also said, well, it'd be kind of interesting to see how many of those were in the top 100 on my Buffalo fan base board, and 11 of the 28 were in the top 11. So I said, well, there's a mixture of scouted slots and X receivers, and that was interesting to me. There were 5 tight ends, and other than Loveland, Arroyo, Helm, Warren, and Mason Taylor, we might be taking a tight end either never or on day 3. Same deal with quarterbacks. Those are the 5 that we scouted.
Okay. So I'm noticing a couple of things on this list.
Yep.
So here's my first observation. So this year, there are approximately 6 safeties in the top 100. And Buffalo has scouted 5 of them. And those guys are going to be within the range. My prediction would be one of the 5 safeties is available at pick 60.
Yes.
We may have 2, but at least one of them should be available at pick 60. And because we've scouted 5 of the 6 best safeties in the class. So that was an observation right off the top.
Yep.
And then Michigan was the top scouted school last year, right, Dean?
Right.
So last year, Buffalo had eyes on Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. So even if Michigan's scout score isn't as high this year, Buffalo had eyes on Michigan last year.
You betcha. You betcha. And and if it does come down to a defensive tackle, it could be from Ohio State or Michigan or some others that we have talked about off the air.
Yep. And we're going to be showing the defensive tackle board with scout score in a few minutes.
Right. So,
Dean, do you want to show everybody the schools that had the highest scout score?
Sure. We'll throw that one up here. Let's go scouts. Share this. All right. Hopefully you're seeing there.
Yep.
So Ohio State and Syracuse can be taken seriously there. I think what happened was that Clemson got some early looks because of Nussmeier and because of Capehart. And as the year went on, it didn't seem that they were returning to Clemson all that much. But there's Michigan again. And they have an 11. So does South Carolina and Alabama. And you probably can see, well, that's where pick 6 Nick comes in.
And from a South Carolina standpoint, for anybody that is not familiar with college football, South Carolina had a really good defense this year. So while some of the guys like TJ Sanders would be an awesome pick, he would be a redundant to Carter and Oliver. But that South Carolina defense between Emenwari, Kennard, and they have at least 2 defensive tackles in this draft. And I have to go back and look to see if they have corners, but that was a really good defense.
Yeah, that's a nice school, and I could see why that they were looked at quite early. But notice the appearance of edge at Syracuse, at Michigan, at South Carolina, at Alabama, and at Texas A&M. Those are the ones that are all the highest there, and but certainly shows some early interest in edge. hopefully not two. Maybe we learn something from the Boogie Basham
Yeah.
selection. But you also have some defensive tackles strewn in there, and then there's not that many wide receivers early that had the large numbers of scouts eyeballs
Yeah.
on them. The tens there are worth looking at too, because Shamar Stewart, at Texas A&M, but don't forget Shamar Turner. I've implore Bean. I've written him a letter. Don't draft two Shamars. You already did it to me with Brett, Benford, and Bernard. You really shouldn't do that. Don't do it again.
So I noticed something else. Hey, Randall, if you look at the by team column,
Yeah.
does anything stand out to you? There is a school that sticks out like a sore thumb to me.
California, for me, having a score of 10 and then having that closest Noel Williams, which you have him on that board at 113, and I love him at 107 without a doubt. And I hope he stays there. But that is interesting that he's got a scout score of 10 already. Well, not him, but California, if you want to expand on that.
Cal was the school that stuck out to me. So having interacted with Dean before, we don't usually do, like, when that used to be Pac-10. It's not Pac-10 anymore, right?
Right.
It's Big 12. Is that Big 12?
Yeah, California?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So scouting a Big 12 school for Brandon Bean isn't normal.
Yeah, it isn't normal.
Like, not to have a score that high. They may have a scout out there. The scout score would be non-zero, but it's not double digits. So that stands out to me. The fact that Stanford is up there too.
Yep.
That's moderately interesting.
And other than Io Manor, I don't see anybody there that they might be interested in, but it's really interesting the amount of visits that came later in the year, and California was one of those, and Oklahoma was, Stanford was. I know that they might always have been interested in Billy Bowman, let's say at their 108 pick or something like that. But it is kind of interesting that these schools all got looks at different times during the year, and I wish I had tracked that a little bit better.
So I do want to shout out Oklahoma, because
you're doing fine, Oklahoma.
Well, so Oklahoma doesn't have a lot of draftable players this year.
Yeah.
So the fact that the score is up to 8 tells me that Buffalo is drafting a safety. We saw on the previous slide that Dean shared, Buffalo has heavily scouted the schools of the top 5 safeties. The fallback plan, if you don't get one of those top 5, is going to be Billy Bowman.
Yes.
Right. Billy Bowman, day 3. And a couple things came back in the scouting reports on Billy Bowman, because we just covered him on the channel earlier this week. Bowman has kick return experience, and you can see that right here. So if you could say, eliminate Codrington, add Bowman, you're getting somebody that has upside to play a position. Bowman can play in the slot, he can play safety, and he can return kicks. And then I also noticed with Noel Williams that Dean had kick returner by Noel Williams.
Yep.
So I think there's smart money to say that one of the defensive backs that we draft will have kick returning upside.
One of the things that I'm kind of intrigued with, it, you were talking about it last night on your podcast last night, and that was that if you could get a wide receiver 6 that could be doing something else in addition, that you might be able to save yourself a roster spot. That's the only reason I would mention Oronde Gadsden of Syracuse, besides Fadil Diggs, who I like in the middle of the draft. Either one of those would make a nice middle of the either late round 4 or something like that. That would be a pretty interesting way to save a spot. And it means the Justin Shorter experiment is over, but it would be another thing you could consider there.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in Diggs to when we get to the edge boards here in a minute.
Yep.
So, Dean, I'm going to flip to the defensive tackle board that I have, okay?
Yep.
Cool. So this is a screenshot of Dean's defensive tackle board, and it's ranked by scout score. So you can see the big board rank on the far left, but you can see that Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Tennessee, Texas A&M are sitting up at the top.
Right.
And we're gonna talk about defensive tackle and the way the defensive tackle class is stacking up a little bit. So here's the way that I'm gonna, let's say, start the conversation. And Randall, feel free to chime in if your assessment differs than mine. So Mason Graham seems to be the defensive tackle everybody has at the top of their board. And if you look, Dean has him at 5th overall on his board. So that's the 5 to the left of Mason Graham halfway down the page.
Yeah, that's McDermott's wet dream.
Yep. So there's another group of defensive tackles that are going to be in some order. And Durst, I see you on the podcast. So Durst, drop in the order you have for Tyleik Williams, Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant. Order those 4 players. So here's what you're probably going to hear. Tyleik Williams, of those 4, has the highest floor. So a team like Cincinnati tends to draft for the floor. They don't want to, they're not going to, more than likely that means they're not drafting Derek Harmon, even though they need a defensive tackle. And Harmon has significantly more upside than, of those 4 guys I listed, I think the upside of Harmon is the highest. Right? Harmon has elite pass rushing traits. He needs to clean up some missed tackles and some things he does with the run defense. But
he transferred from Michigan State to Oregon, had his best year in Oregon, so I could only see ascension from there for that ceiling to keep going. I agree.
Yeah. And then Kenneth Grant is a favorite of Bills Mafia. He's coming in with a reasonably high floor, but there's still going to be some like pass rushing. He's not coming in with a bunch of pass rush moves on the inside. Walter Nolan is uber athletic.
Yep.
So you would have to ask yourself, how high are you willing to draft a 280-pound defensive tackle that's really athletic?
And when you have Ed Oliver, that's a real important question. And think about how often you've been gashed up the middle.
Yep.
I would be looking for one that was able to get pressure on the quarterback quick, and I would be looking for somebody that has the personality for that room. That's why I kind of go with the scout score here that Harmon and Tyleik Williams have the highest scout score, and that might be worth noting. And then the interview, Tyleik Williams has a better interview than Derek Harmon. It's just something I do is listen to interviews ad nauseum when I'm doing this stuff.
So a couple of other things that I'll point out. So we visited Tennessee a lot, which is actually interesting because it's not like Tennessee has a lot of players this year.
Right.
So other than Omar Norman-Lott and Brew McCoy and Dylan Sampson.
Vontaze Sprayans.
Okay, so day 3 offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's interesting because Omar Norman-Lott is not somebody that I think fits the Bills culture.
I would agree.
He's like started a couple of fights and things.
We typically stay away.
But it's interesting that we visited Tennessee that much.
Right.
Right. And he's the guy, right? Like I would be willing to put money that Omar Norman-Lott is the highest drafted player at Tennessee this year.
You'd probably You'd probably be right. I can't see anybody except for Riley Mills that had more sacks in his career.
Yeah. So
Wasn't Brew McCoy could be one because they didn't know when they were coming back, and then was it Thornton too? Right, Thornton, the wide receiver.
that's right. They had two wide receivers, but I think
Yeah,
we had McCoy higher.
Dante Thornton. Dante Thornton's still good though. I think he's a big X as well, but I
Okay.
could be wrong. I was just because there was another one, so I wonder if it was wide receivers on the scouting, not Orman Law.
Yeah.
Well, that you make a very good point, and that is that we don't really know who they're actually looking at when they go to the school. They're sitting in the crowd, and they might be there for one person and see another, but for the most part, they're there probably to get some answers about one or two players. The exception to me was that this year, it looked like they went to schools where, for instance, two wide receivers were squaring off in one on one side and one on the other side of the ball. So they always have a wide receiver to look at.
That's a good observation.
Yeah.
I'm looking at just kind of perusing the list. Cam Jackson's interesting. So I think if we miss on defensive tackle or we double dip, a player like Cam Jackson on day 3 could make sense, as could like Jamari Caldwell.
Oh, Jamari Caldwell would be a really good. He has one of those interesting personalities that would fit with the culture. Listen to an interview sometime with him. He isn't the right build. He's built like an outhouse.
Yeah.
A short outhouse.
Yeah.
But he's a skill.
Yeah, he popped out in the Senior Bowl. Caldwell had a good one. He was definitely pushing up that middle. I liked watching him on the Senior Bowl, and I put him higher in my rankings after that, just a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. So Durst, thanks for dropping that in, because that's actually going to be the next cause of discussion. So I don't know. Hopefully you guys saw this chat, but he had Tyleek relatively low relative to consensus. So that's pretty interesting, Durst. If you could explain Deone Walker over Derek Harmon, that's something I would be interested in listening to. So one other player here who I really like, and if you've listened to the Draft Professor before, Owen likes him a lot too, and that's Alfred Collins of Texas.
Yep.
So
yeah.
Dean has him at the end of round 2, and I've got him in round 1.
Right.
I have him at the end of round 1.
Right. And what we're going to do next is, Randall, we're going to kind of talk through, let's do your defensive tackle board in the middle first. So, Randall, do you want to kind of walk through your board and explain why you have player A higher than player B as you go through your board?
For sure. So I have obviously Mason Graham first, as we talked about, Buffalo's wet dream. That would be, if he fell to maybe 8 or 9, we could trade up for. And then I have Kenneth Grant. I think Kenneth Grant is one of the best IDLs in the middle. I think he took on a lot of double teams for Michigan, for Mason Graham, and he powered through those. I think he's a really good one tech, perfect for Buffalo sort of thing. And then, as we've talked about, Alfred Collins. I love Alfred Collins. I think he's one of the most athletic one techs. He can move. He can dive. Arkansas's fumble, he went Superman, and it was insane. He's got 6 batted balls. He does it all sort of thing. He's an athlete, and I love that. And then I have Derek Harmon right under him. It's kind of like a battle, but I do prefer Alfred Collins over Derek Harmon. But Derek Harmon's great as well. Probably, I believe, has the most pressures coming out of the A gap for this year, and I love that. That's something that Buffalo needs, of course. I've got Walter Nolan next. Yeah, right. Walter Nolan, big fan. Go ahead. Sorry, Dean. Go ahead.
No. That's probably the reason that Oregon got such a high scout score too. Is the Oregon doesn't fit in their normal order either, because A, it's on the West Coast, and
Right.
they have to send Majeski out to the West Coast, and that's a long distance. That's where my kids are. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
go ahead.
And then
And Randall,
go ahead.
what round or like where are we on your board? Like if you're at Derek Harmon at 4, how high is he on your board?
So overall, like top 50, top
Yeah.
100. Yeah. So Derek Harmon is in my late 20s. So 28, 29, right around there. And then Walter Nolan is right at the end, 32 through 34, I believe. So number 5's at Walter Nolan. Love Walter Nolan. Big old 3-tech, 305 pounds going through that B cap sort of thing. Super powerful. Kind of sticks it in the foot to ground and wins. He doesn't have a lot of pass rush moves, but I believe that his power and his bend work for him at 305 pounds. So I love that about Nolan. Then I have Tyleek Williams next, probably the best run defender in the league this year for sure, which would help Buffalo, of course, because our run defense is terrible. But the pass rush is something that I would like to see out of it. I mean, if he had a good pass rush, he'd probably be at number 2, number 1. Let's be real at that point. I like Riley Mills in Notre Dame. Notre Dame being the team that they were this year, and I have listened to some interviews, and I like Riley Mills' interviews. He's a good in the center, just kind of he puts it all together, and he always contributes on every play. So I like that motor on him. I have TJ Sanders after that. I like TJ Sanders in that 3-tech spot. I don't think he's much of a fit for Buffalo, in my opinion, but I like his motor, and of course, I love that team that he was on. Deion Walker after that. I mean, really, when I'm putting Deion Walker there, it's his size and his traits. Hopefully, transition into the NFL. Big old guy, 6'7", just gigantic. Like, can he just be in the NFL and work out? I'd like to see a combine thing. Like, let's say he runs an insane 40, and then he gets into that T'Vondre Sweat sort of thing, where people start intriguing by his athletic plus his size. So I'm intrigued to see how that ends up. And then I have Jordan Phillips next, and then Omar Lott. Omar Norman Lott is a bully, and I really like the way he plays. I am questioning on the character concerns to see how that goes. I mean, a fight or two, yeah, but then obviously those combine interviews and the interviews will help out. But he's a big bully, and I do like his style over at Tennessee. But that's my list for defensive linemen. Dean, how'd I do?
So
that's cool.
And this is why I love the draft. So Durst, thank you for being here. You're here every night just about, so thank you. If we compare Durst's board to Randall's, what I'm absolutely fascinated with is always like how somebody stacks, player X to player Y. So if you look, Graham, Nolan, Grant, Harmon are 4 of his top 5.
Right.
And that matches Randall with the exception of Alfred Collins versus Deone Walker. Now, we're doing a podcast on Monday of players that will be overdrafted because of their traits, meaning that you may not see it on film, but you can't ignore the player's size or this athletic trait of the player. And Deone Walker is one of those 10. So we went to any position who's going to get overdrafted simply because they have a trait. And Deone Walker, he was one of the first ones that got added to the podcast list. So just pointing out that pretty much from Tyleek Williams up, if you want to draft him, you're going to need to take him in the first 40 picks of the draft.
Absolutely.
Right. You can't expect him to fall to 56. It's not going to happen. So if you want one, you're going to need to either stick and pick at 30 or go up and get the guy you want. And I have a feeling that's Kenneth Grant. I think we're moving up to get Kenneth Grant if I had to predict the future.
There you go.
Let's predict that future.
Right. Randall, do you want to go through your edge list?
Sure. Yeah, of course, I've got Abdul Carter first. He is the, cream of the crop, might go 1 sort of thing. Michael Williams, I really love Michael Williams from Georgia. At 265, he kind of plays everywhere. His lateral movement on the line's really good. He already has like NFL stunts ready, things along those lines, can power through people, A gap, B gap on the outside tackle. So I like Michael Williams as a full product, and I think he's NFL ready. James Pierce Jr., big fan of. I think he might have led in pressures total. He gets to the quarterback. He hits well. Big fan of him. Got to watch him live against Arkansas when we got that upset. Jalen Walker next. I know he's in a outside linebacker position, but he kind of plays that odd front, and he comes in with a lot of pressures. He should go in the top 15. I got Shamar Stewart on the traits. I know he's probably one of those 10 that you guys will discuss on Monday.
Yep.
But but I mean, I think his ceiling's super high, 285, I believe, and he moves like he's 260, 265. He's quick, powerful. If you take those traits and make them work, I don't think that Buffalo should take him personally because I don't know. We don't develop defensive line well, so I'm afraid at just taking those traits and not being able to do it. My next one's Mike Green, of course. Mike Green showed at the Senior Bowl that he's got power in addition to his elusiveness on pass rushes. So he looked good. Excited to see what he does. Hopefully his combine interviews go well and his combine goes well. We have Cal Kennard. I am a big fan of Cal Kennard. I think he fits the Buffalo prototype. He moves well at 250, sets the edge well, plays good in run support, has a huge motor on him, will go sideline to sideline and doesn't quit. I think he's a good target for Buffalo in that second. And then Braden Swinson. Honestly, Kennard and Swinson were super hard. I didn't know which one to put above each other because I love them both. Swinson kind of almost bleeds Buffalo, in my opinion. He's a workhorse. He sets the edge really well. He attacks on run support. He's a great tackler. And he uses his athleticism to pressure the quarterback, and he gets with it. He's just a good, hard-working, blue-collar kind of guy, which I love. And then next one, Nick Scourton. Nick Scourton's super quick. I mean, he probably should be in defensive tackles, but he was on that edge. Nick Scourton's 2 years, really, really good production, shows that I believe he was a 5-star recruit. Moves well, can go through any gap, and he's got a lot of traits that are good for the NFL. JTT Tuimoloau from Ohio State. I have him in that back there. He moves quick. I would like to see his pass rush is really, really good. I would like to see a little bit more. I'm a little concerned that possibly the Ohio State line helped him out a little bit, and that's why I put him at 10. But I do like JTT for sure. I have Princely Uman Malin at 11. Super powerful. Sometimes he goes hot and cold. When it's cold, it's cold. But when it's hot, he looks like a bull coming right at that line, and I really like to watch him play. Jared Ivey next. Jared Ivey could be also in defensive tackle, or no, he'd be an edge. But Jared Ivey moves. He's bigger, 6'6", really lengthy, can push behind on those offensive linemen to gain leverage on run support. And I do love his run support, kind of like Ty Leaks. And then last but not least, Landon Jackson, my guy from Arkansas. I think he can fit Buffalo, and he did lose some stock in that Senior Bowl, which could be beneficial for us because he may fall into our last pick in the second round. And he's got super lengthy, kind of Greg Rousseau style, where help with run support and get the pressures and sacks when he can. But he's the last on that list. Dean, how'd I do again?
I like this. What I'm thinking as you're talking about it is who do we have and how would they complement what the Bills want to do? And you mentioned the one thing, and that is we have Rousseau on the one side, unless he's traded for Myles Garrett. But as you were saying, run defender. Those are the ones that the Bills are going to want to shore up.
Yeah,
especially in the middle there. If they don't get Garrett and can keep Rousseau, what would match on the other side? And they're going to be platooning. So right. My biggest concern was that we get another Jerry Hughes who always left the back door open, and players would go around that his end. The other thing I wanted to say was that the edges interchangeable here. I actually have Mike Green off my board for Buffalo, and Abdul Carter off my board for Buffalo just because of character issues. And I have therefore I have Kyle Kennard in the 6th spot there.
Oh, awesome. I do love Kennard.
Swinson versus Kennard. It's like my dad used to say, the harder decision is to make, the less it will matter.
Yeah, fair point.
So,
It's a good list.
Randall, where do you have Jordan Birch from Oregon?
Jordan Birch would be right under Landon Jackson.
Got it.
Right there. My only concern with Jordan Bush is he's kind of more just a over the tackle. He's not versatile. He's basically going in that 5-eye and pressuring from there and there only. So maybe the versatility wouldn't be Buffalo's main attraction for him.
Got it. Because I thought from a size and athletic profile, he fit what we look for. But you're saying he can't go to a 7 or a 9?
I haven't seen it, so I could be wrong, but I haven't seen him go further outside in the 7 or 9 or even try and go in the 3-tech gap, the B gap, or anything along those lines. I haven't seen it.
That's interesting because I had him in the defensive tackle group, and Newton Owen said he's an edge. He plays 5'7", 9".
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you said that. So okay.
Occasionally moved into 1-tech, and I think the Bills were interested in his bookend a couple of years ago, and that was Brandon Dorless. He in 2022 he played opposite Brandon Dorless, who I think Falcons took as an edge. So,
no.
Okay. So a couple of guys that I would point out. So like, if Jalen Walker got within striking distance of Buffalo, and he's not, but if there was a move to trade up to get Jalen Walker, where you're like giving up a second, but you're going up to get Walker, that like to me, out of all those guys, he's the one that could rise up and be a significant impact player. Like, I think a lot of those other guys are really good edges. Whereas Walker the scouting report seems to say he can become something significantly better than where he is right now. Like a couple of like an all-pro level player. And the reason why I say that is like, I would probably say like Stewart and Scourton, you could probably say the same thing. Like if Stewart and Scourton if one of them is there at 30, I might take the edge over the defensive tackle. Probably not, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was the decision.
Yeah, it would be. It wouldn't surprise me either. Jalen Walker would be a good one. I mean, with that edge into outside linebacker style, we've used that and we've been successful with it.
Yep. And then, okay, so we covered Ivy. Okay. Do you want to walk through your wide receiver board, Randall?
All right, sure. Ted McMillan is my wide receiver 1. I understand that he has flaws. He is not my absolute, there's a large gap between it sort of thing. But Ted McMillan is my number 1. Luther Burden, number 2. I love Luther Burden's style, power slot, break tackles, big fan. Emeka Egbuka is my number 3. I mean, he's the Ohio State slot receiver that does it all sort of thing. If I would be pounding the table for Buffalo to get them if Mac Hollins didn't have such a great year, because that's with the blocking ability and things along those lines. I'd hope we re-sign Mac Hollins. Xavier Restrepo is my number 4. Big fan of Xavier Restrepo. His route running is one of the best in the draft this year, and he can get out. He's a 6 foot 202, so he's got some weight on him that he can kind of carry with him, which I love. Alec Iomanner might be one of the best vertical threats on contested catches and things along those lines. I mean, he was doing it in Stanford where they weren't helping him at all. So his ceiling's through the roof once he gets to the NFL with some better players around him. I got Jaden Higgins next. He's probably the highest riser in the past couple months. 6'4", big guy, but can move quick in the short and intermediate. So I love his route running short, but then can also obviously get those contested catches. I've got Jack Besh at 7. I've been pounding the table since about October for him. I think he's one of the best route runners in the class. I think his intermediate is perfect. His hitches, his posts are really good, and he'll catch in the middle of the field with taking a hit. He's kind of do-it-all guy, which I love. I got Trey Harris next. I mean, he has 5.15 yards per route run this year, which is insane. Broke 1,000 in 8 games, 8 touchdowns in 8 games sort of thing. So the production is absolutely insane. There's some things that I worry about. Sometimes just how he operates on the boundary is a little concerning. That's why I have him behind Jack Besh. And then I have Ty Felton next. Ty Felton, I mean, reminds me a little bit of Stephon Diggs. He has that twitchy short and intermediate to gain separation. I think he would be a great fit for Buffalo as well. But I do love everything about Ty Felton. I got Matthew Golden, and I know that I'm a little on the backside of Matthew Golden. A lot of people are putting him in the wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 range. I like Matthew Golden. I think he's great. He had a great second half. I'm concerned of risking a late first, early second on a player that might not produce in the NFL, but I could be very wrong. I got Ricky White next. I'm a big fan of Ricky White. I think he, especially for Buffalo, 6'1", 207, 208, I believe. He is a gadget guy, but a field stretching guy at the same point. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like Terry McLaurin in a power slot sort of thing where he can run those wheel routes and hitches inside and gain those yak after that. I think he'd be a perfect Curtis Samuel replacement, in my opinion. I've got Jalen Royals next. I might be bumping up Jalen Royals. He had a good Senior Bowl. He looks good at 200 pounds. Obviously, he had an injury, so that was his first little stint back. Combine will be good and interviews will be, but I'm a big fan of Jalen Royals as well. I got Savion Williams next. I mean, he easily has the lowest floor, but the highest ceiling out of all the wide receivers in this class. I'm willing to bet on the ceiling personally, especially because TCU used him in the run game, and that unlocked a lot, and I'm really excited to see if he can translate that into the NFL for sure. Andrew Armstrong from Arkansas. I know I'm pretty few and far between on him, but I think he's got it all. He played on an Arkansas team for 2 years with barely an offensive lineman and rotating quarterbacks at that. He still managed to put up good yards and always against good teams. Tennessee breaks 100 yards. All those big competition games, never back down sort of thing, so I love him. And then Ja'Cory Brooks from Louisville. Big fan of Ja'Cory Brooks. Also kind of reminds me a little bit like Stephon Diggs. He's got that good separation, and at the stem of the route, he can burn you. And I'm a big fan of his route running as well as his field stretching. Does the same as Jack Bech, too. He will catch a ball in the middle of the field, take a hit, and still hold on to that ball.
That's awesome.
Cool. And to give everybody an idea of the colors, so the blue players are graded in round 1. I believe that light green color is around 1, 2. So that would be probably like a player between 25 and 35. And then the magenta color is around 2, followed by a purple, which is around 2, 3. Right, Randall?
That's correct.
Yeah. So the interesting thing with Savion Williams, like I'm always like, when is the pick worth the risk?
Right.
Like for me, if I can take Savion Williams in round 3, I feel way better than spending a second on him.
Agreed.
But Buffalo doesn't have a round 3. So that means like, if that's the guy that Dean likes, you pull the James Cook deal where you're trading back and you're manipulating the backside of your draft board, moving a couple of picks up. And then you grab Williams with maybe a couple of other round 3 guys.
I would think, let's say in a hypothetical that we have all our first 3 picks for the round. I wouldn't be surprised if it was like what Brandon Beane did with Boogie Basham, even though it was a bad pick. He was like, we had 1 to 2 guys, and if they were not there, we were going to trade back sort of thing. And Boogie Basham was still there, so they took him. I bet that that's going to be our 62 pick. There's going to be 1 or 2 guys left after we pick from 56. Be like, if they're not there, we'll go back in the 3rd and probably pick something else up.
Yeah. Yeah, because I definitely like the corner group at round 3, 4. I like better than taking a corner in round 2. Right? Like just with where I think the players are falling on the board.
Dean, what do you think? With the corner?
You're saying on corner? Yeah. I think they're getting a vet, so they're probably looking for a high upside corner to groom rather than pushing them in, making the mistake they did with Kaiir Elam is groom him on the side before he has to be in the show. You know what I mean?
Well, and we should observe with the roster, right? Okay, so if we look at the roster, Elam's contract is up. So we already need a corner to replace Douglas. Mm-hmm. Next year, Elam's contract is up.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this was Ingram's second accrued season. So we only have 2 years left of Ingram.
Yes.
Right. So we need a couple of backups on their first contract.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they took two. I just don't know when.
Yep.
Right. You're gonna be looking for these pockets of players that, especially with our new guy that was added today, he's more of a man coverage guy. Will they? And they started playing more man in the playoffs. Are they going to be looking for more of the man corners? And that's a topic for a whole nother night.
Yeah. Well, then looking at those college scout scores, you have California with the 10 and Noah Williams at that best bet. And Noah Williams, I think, is pretty much a good substitute in Rasul Douglas. He's a ball hawk, good tackler, solid replacement.
Right. There's one of the good things about Noah Williams is that besides the kick return capability, is that there isn't any fall off between zone and man, whereas there is a fall off with somebody like Justin Wally or Brandon Adams, some of the others. So they're going to be looking for a cornerback that can do man coverage, and there's no fall off in zone. One of my favorites that comes from a school that's on there is O'Donnell Fortune, and he would be one of the last picks. But he is such a good tackler and equally good in zone or man. So maybe that's another player that they would see when they were there looking at the other more high profile players.
I love that.
Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to do is talk about, and we did wide receiver. We saw Randall's wide receiver board on the previous slide. These are 3 wide receiver boards. The one on the left is Newt. The one in the middle is Owen. The one on the right is Josh. This is not their board. They had to pick, as the point of an exercise we did for a podcast last week, which wide receivers are your best deep threats? And they had 4 categories to put a wide receiver in. And the wide receiver could not be in more than one category.
You mean?
So it was a fun exercise. But what I want to be able to point out, and to the point that like Randall was making when he covered his wide receivers, if you notice, everybody agrees that Isaiah Bond is a deep threat. Right? Big surprise. He might be the fastest player at the combine.
Right.
Okay. So my opinion is while I would love Jack Besh in Buffalo, I think Buffalo's going to look for somebody that goes downfield more.
Yeah, no, I very much agree.
Right. So it was interesting that all 3 of them put Ty Felton there, because other people saw this list and they said Ty Felton's not a deep threat. So
he did really well in scouted games. I just want to tell you that.
Yeah, I think he is a field stretcher. We're talking, I know there was a conversation about Ty Felton on how running like a 4-3-5, but even if he runs a 4-4-2, 4-4-4, then he'll be more than fine. He's still a field stretcher. It does not matter. Yep. That speed is still there, personally.
Yep. And if you look at boards, Ty Felton is probably between 60 and 175. I've seen him as low as like the 160s. And I've seen him, I think at Draft Professor, we're kind of high on him. I think a lot of us have been putting him in like the top 70, top 75, top 100.
Yeah.
Right in there. But I think we're higher on Ty Felton than consensus.
I'll take it.
Which is really weird that all of us are higher on him than anybody that's not it's weird. It's like we're in our own little bubble or something.
He had good production, and he had early production, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm surprised that the hype isn't there, because in the first 6 weeks,
but the production tailed off at the end.
It did, yeah.
Right. So because I know when we did him, we covered him in October.
I think he was first.
I don't know that we've revisited him since.
Yeah.
So, okay. So then look at the players who are the bottom 2 or 3 for the deep threats, because Theo Wease and Will Shepard, we're going to probably be able to get in round 5.
Yeah.
Right.
Ricky White, we can probably get in round 3. Maybe he goes, Randall, how high do you have Ricky White?
I have Ricky White as the beginning of the 3rd, but
Okay.
I would not be surprised if the consensus puts him more towards the 4th.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm at 134.
There you go.
Yep. So Ricky
4th.
White would be late day 2, early day 3.
Yeah.
But definitely a deep threat gadget wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then if you notice, Ricky White made 2 of the 3 lists. So 2 of the 3 guys said when they had to kind of bucket where they would put Ricky White, 2 of them put him as a deep threat. The 3rd one put him as a slot, is where you would likely play him. And then Torrey Horton was another player that was identified as a deep threat. So if we want a downfield wide receiver, if it's not Matthew Golden or Isaiah Bond early, this is the list that you target on day 3.
Yeah. Go hit that Mountain West, baby.
So let's pause for a second. Dean, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody? Let them know how they can find you.
Yeah. Most of my writing on the draft is at buffalofambase.com. And that's an easy way to get, or you can just look below my name there at TCBills_Astro. TC stands for training camp. And training camp is I'm 5 minutes from training camp, and that always helps. Doesn't help getting in, but it helps being so close. I've tried strategies like walking in backwards, and they think I'm leaving, so they let me in. But it's been fun doing this, and I enjoy the having 3 people to bounce ideas off of, and that's always good to have a difference of opinion on certain players.
Yes.
It makes you go back and say, yeah, maybe I should have considered Ricky White, Mountain West. And then you find out more information about him. And Ricky White killed in the 2023 games and the 2024 games that the Bills scouted. And that always helps. It leaves a nice impression in their minds.
So Randall, how about you?
At Randall Slifer for Twitter and Blue Sky. You can catch me there. And then I'm doing all my draft content with draft professors. And I'll always interact on Twitter and Blue Sky. And that's about it.
Cool. Well, you can follow me at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. And I definitely want to give a shout out. Like, Draft Professor would not be where it is without the help of Dean. Dean shares with me his player board, so I usually have a player list to load into the simulator really early on in the draft cycle. The toughest thing with running a draft simulator is the player list. Like, we produce 2 podcasts a day. This is the first of 2 podcasts today. If you come back in an hour, we're doing a special Ohio State draft special. So we have an Ohio State podcaster. She's going to talk about the players' importance to Ohio State. And then we're going to have Newt talking about where the draft community rates players like Donovan Jackson, Emeka Egbuka, Josh Simmons, and more. So that's coming in an hour. But I also want to point out something that Dean said. So everything at the Draft Professors, we have multiple opinions, right? We have multiple opinions. We have Durst coming in with his board as part of the podcast. Dean sharing his board, Randall sharing his. No one board is correct, and what makes the draft work is that there's 32 teams with 32 independent evaluations of the players.
Right.
And that's the way that it works. The same way that there's a draft simulator, a Draft Professor, 32 teams, 32 player boards. So what you do for one team doesn't impact how the other teams draft, and it makes it way more random. And that's the way I like to talk about the draft. I want to get into the randomness aspect. And I also have 3 engineering degrees, so I tend to like numbers just a little bit. Kind of thing.
And numbers are a lot like spreadsheets. So that's why I like it.
Yeah.
And then I definitely want to give Dean a shout out because he's in Fairport, New York. I grew up in Fairport. I'm a graduate of Fairport High School. So I got a chance to meet Dean when I was in Western New York for something. I think I was in town to see my cousin. I stopped by to see Dean.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It was fun.
And I'm from Henrietta. So if we all three do not get
awesome.
a garbage plate at some point, I'll be very angry.
Yes.
We have to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That might have to happen.
At the Super Bowl parade next
There
week.
you go. Yeah, I was supposed to be there like in a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that good for you. I'm envious. Actually, I'd like to be there when the Bills are playing, but you have to make all the arrangements before.
Yeah.
Before they win.
Well,
Right.
and Dean, like if you like training camp, I think you will like the Senior Bowl equal or more.
Oh, very good.
So
very good.
Can get Draft Professor. We can get you to the Senior Bowl. So we need to do something when that rolls around next year.
Sounds like a plan. We'll figure this out.
Absolutely.
And then I should be at Bill's training camp next year too. So I'll keep in contact for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have to figure out how to get credentialed so we can get in. That's been the trick.
For what? The Senior Bowl?
Training camp to get in every day.
Yeah, let's do it.
We might be able to use the Draft Professor to do that. I mean, it got us into the Senior Bowl.
We'll be doing work. It's real. Like we'll be working.
It's all tax deductible, right?
So good seeing you guys, and hopefully we'll do this again.
Oh, absolutely. So on behalf of Dean, Randall, myself, the 32 podcasters at Draft Professor, thank you for watching. And we will see you on the podcast again in 1 hour.
Go Bills.
Go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. Please follow the Draft Professor channel on YouTube at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. We look forward to seeing you on our podcast tomorrow.